This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm David McDonald.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
And we didn't even have to plan that one. Normally we spend a lot of time planning what order we're going to go in, but I think we got that one nailed. It's because we've been working together so long, right, Sam?
That's right. And thank goodness none of the other guys are here.
I know, right? They just talk and talk and talk and talk.
Just a nonstop drag on our chi. Wait a minute, we're not broadcasting, are we?
I'll cut it out, don't worry.
Fix it in post.
I'll fix it in post. Been reading a lot and talking a lot this year, and really since we started doing the show, about orchestras and how orchestras in the United States are maybe not in the best shape that they've been in their lives in a lot of ways. I think so. One of the first stories we ever started talking about at the very beginning of doing the show, please don't go back and look at it because we were terrible at doing shows. But one of the very first stories that we ever started talking about on the show was the Detroit Symphony Orchestra's labor strike. And this, over many years of this, has had kind of an impact on the size of orchestras. Michael Cooper pointed this out in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago in an article titled "Rollover Mahler, U.S. Orchestras Are Shrinking." And he points out several numbers, and some of them are pretty profound, shrinking in many cases 10, 15, 20% from their size from just 5 or 10 years ago. And the result is that those orchestras then first, when they're putting their programs together, are looking for smaller works to begin with, and when they do larger works, larger orchestral, kind of romantic and even modern works, they are having to hire subs, hire ringers, hire people off the list, and those kind of contract players don't feel a part of the ensemble. They don't rehearse as much with the ensemble, and in some ways make the ensemble feel less cohesive, and the quality of that performance comes down a little bit. Sam, do you think that's true? I think we lose something by hiring all of these subs.
Well, it's a tough question because all orchestras play with subs, no matter what. It's always happening. No matter how many musicians an orchestra has on their roster, there's always going to be situations where subs are playing.
But then, do we lose something of that characteristic Philadelphia sound, or something of this characteristic Cleveland sound, or something?
I think the bassist Michael Kurth, who's quoted in this article, wrote a blog post while Atlanta. He's the bassist in the Atlanta Symphony. Wrote a blog post where he
also on the negotiating team.
Right.
Happening.
And I think made a very good used a very good metaphor for this, or actually it would be a simile because he used like. It's like a championship baseball team trying to turn a triple play with a star shortstop who has just arrived from elsewhere. It's the analogy being that it doesn't matter how individually good that person is, that fill-in bass player or fill-in violinist or whatever, they're not a part of the band. They don't groove with the band every week. And I think certainly some of that has an effect on the way something's going to sound. But I think,
and much like the intangibles associated with turning a triple play, it's really hard to describe exactly precisely what you're missing.
Right. However, having said that, I don't think that it's something that deserves. Shouldn't be categorized as a tragedy or anything that an orchestra is going to have 12, contract musicians come in to be able to play this certain piece. Do I think in any kind of real noticeable way, especially for people other than the players in the orchestra, are you going to notice a big difference? And I would say probably not, because we're talking about a very expensively trained, very good players, because we know there's lots of players looking for work.
Sure.
And, I just
go ahead.
I just think that the difference is there, and it is real, but the only people who really hear it in a real tangible way that would even affect their feeling about the aesthetic quality of the performance is the musicians.
Yeah, I see that, and another thing to remember is that the musicians in the orchestra have tenure and the subs don't. So if the musicians in the orchestra are starting to have a little backslide on their playing chops, they stay in the orchestra, but the subs get, they get bumped if they don't have a great show. And I think there are some cases in which those subs could actually be better players than the tenured players in the orchestra who are a little past their prime, if you know what I mean. I know that's not a popular sentiment, but I've heard some really atrocious performances by principal players who have overstayed their welcome.
Or, atrocious performances coming out of the backside of the second violins, because there's some people who have overstayed their term, but still in the section.
But in general, I think this is one of the things that concerns me about the shrinking size of these orchestras the most is that I would not want an artistic director or a music director to make creative decisions in putting a symphony season together based on the business limitations that are imposed upon them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I understand that sentiment, but that's like saying an orchestra doesn't have to do what every other business out there has to do.
But an orchestra is not like every other business, and I don't want to compare them to other businesses because they are different.
But you were just talking about this is something that goes on.
If they were like every other business, they would just record movie scores and do video games live.
That's true, but it's what you're talking about. They do already. They're just going to be doing it some more now. I mean, they're always considering what they can manage based on the resources they have and what other resources they can pay for.
Sure, and there are always limitations. As composers, of course, we know this. We know that there are limitations of the instrument, right? I can't write a low F for the violin because that's below their lowest note, unless I want to have them change something about the violin, the way the violin's normally set up, right? That's just outside of the realm of possibility for that instrument. However, I'm also usually writing for a violin that has 4 strings and not 1 string, right? There are some things that I should be able to expect, and I think that there are some things that a music director should reasonably be able to expect when he or she is putting together a season.
Agreed. I think the way orchestras do business and the way just the way it is to be an orchestra is going to change over the next several decades. I don't see how it can't.
Well, lots of things are changing about orchestras, right, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. Slowly. It's funny that you bring that up because one thing that hasn't changed, turns out, over the past basically the past 100 years, at least at the Met, and if we're going to take the Met as sort of a model for opera as a popular idiom.
Don't. But I'll go with you.
Well, actually, I want to start off with this Noel Coward quote. People are wrong when they say opera is not what it used to be. It is what it used to be. That is what's wrong with it.
That's good. I like it.
It is good. A musician, programmer, composer, Subi Raman, who is a guy, and that's important because whether or not we know that person is a man or a woman based on their name is something we're going to discuss. But we covered, I don't know how long ago, several months ago, or possibly even more than a year ago, that the Met was releasing all of their data having to do with performances, premieres, everything, going back to 1905. And it didn't go all the way through completely present. I forgot when the end date, 2010. And so he graphed all this information, correlating it in different ways, and the name of the piece on his Tumblr is 10 Graphs to Explain the Metropolitan Opera. And it sort of confirms some things that I had in my mind, sort of just in a cranky composer kind of way. But when you look at the data, it actually supports my cranky composer disposition. The first graph we see, and we're going to have links to this, and you should go look at these, is the percentage of performances of opera composed within the last 25 years. So the graph is showing starting in 1905 and then going forward, showing the percentage of performances during those years that were of operas composed within the last 25 years. And when you hit 1939, there's an actual 8-year gap or so where there are none. And that's sort of the line of demarcation. Starting at, 1940, more or less, until now, there are barely any composers who were born, barely any pieces of composers who were composed within the last 25 years, just a smattering here and there. So it's like go to around 1880, 1890, and that's when the line is. We stopped doing operas anytime after that. There's another one that shows the same operas with a graph of 50 years. It just shows the same shape. Not many new compositions being done. Percentage of performances where the composer is dead, sort of the inverse relationship. It's very high, even going back to 1905, and virtually from
which it is around 100 and hits 100 and stays at 100.
Yeah.
It's kind of astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, the graph just goes. There's a few blips, but basically hugs the top 100% bar from 1950 until now.
If this were the VU meter and you were making a recording of somebody, you would be clipping a lot.
Yes. The median year of opera composition
is the craziest.
This one is the craziest one. It's basically 1875. The increments that we're looking at are 50-year increments. So it goes 1800, 1850, 1900, etc. The line, I mean, with a blip in the 1980s where it goes down and then up, it rides like 1875, right between the 1850 and the 1900 line, just straight down the middle. And
the absolute most recent is 1888, and the absolute most historic is 1849.
Yes.
That is not a wide range
for
very 100 years of Met programs.
He has one in here that's called conservativeness. What it is the relationship between the current time and the repertoire that the Met is doing. So what is the current time in relationship to the year of composition of the piece? How close are they? And as to be expected, in 1905, it's 40 years. And then as you go... Yeah. And then as you go forward to current times, that distance gets greater and greater and greater and greater, as to be expected.
It's as to be expected because of the graph we just talked about. They're performing stuff in the same year, and every year it gets a year later, and that stuff gets a year older. So this has,
and they're not changing.
If you remember your freshman geometry class, this is a slope of 1. Like every year, all that stuff gets 1 year older.
Yeah, and they're not doing anything behavior-wise to make the graph's shape change.
Just a straight diagonal line. I mean, this is amazing. The other one that I think is really kind of breathtaking is the percentage of performances by selected composers.
Yes.
So he just pulls out 4 composers: Mozart, Puccini, Verdi, and Wagner. So 4 composers, a German, 2 Italians, and another German. And he shows an area graph of the percentages by these 4. Now, what is the most astonishing is that added up, they several times over the last 100 years represent over 70% of the season's performances.
Just those 4 composers.
And they rarely fall below 50.
Only inception of World War I, Wagner goes to 0 for obvious reasons. And that year, without the Wagner bump to help push the numbers up, it goes below 40%. But no other time. Well... Yeah. Another couple of times it's dipped slightly below 50.
Yeah, most of the time it's more than half.
It has a list of the most commonly performed operas just by specific opera, which is interesting. But wait, you say, why aren't American composers included above? This is funny the way he puts it. The Met is an American opera company. Well, frankly, American composers are more or less a rounding error at the Met. The best showing was a run of Porgy and Bess in the mid 1980s. So there are in the mid 1980s. There's a tiny blip, the percentage of American composers, but otherwise it's basically a flat line.
When it goes up to 11.42%.
Right.
That's your blip.
And completely unsurprisingly, percentage of performances by male and female composers. Male, 100%. Female, 0%. That's in the data set. However, there is an addendum added down here that in 1903, which is 2 years before the data set that he's dealing with starts, Dame Ethel Smythe's Der Wald was performed twice in 1903. So they have had one female composer.
So, but that is in the last 100 years they've had none.
Yes, which I think
Zero.
I think we need to start a campaign to get take your pick. Cold Mountain, some opera, or send a list of operas by female composers, like a list of demands to the Met.
Yes, you should nail it to the door.
That's right. Nail it to the door.
A list of 95 operas by women composers nailed to the door of the Met. That would be quite the dramatic event.
So I don't think that there's anything. The overall trends highlighted in all those graphics in that piece are not surprising. Just the degree to which our fears are confirmed, maybe, is breathtaking.
I don't think I would have guessed that any of these, without looking at the numbers, I don't think I would have guessed that any of these were quite as extreme as they were. Like, we joke about them never performing any works by women, but I would have never guessed that they had literally done zero in the last 100 years. And we joke that they only perform Wagner, Verdi, Puccini, and Mozart, but I would have never guessed that half of everything they perform is by just 4 composers.
Yes.
We joke that they've been performing the same repertoire from the same 10-year period for the last 100 years, but I never would have guessed that it was literally true.
Yes. It's... Woof. I would like to know what a lot of people who are way more invested in opera than I am think about that, actually. So, I guess Danny Felsenfeld probably has some thoughts. He's into opera. So, Danny, if you hear this, let us know what you think about this data. The same guy, Subi, I guess.
I like a good graph.
I love me some graph. He did he did another thing involving orchestras. Graphing gender in America's top 20 orchestras. Now, the reason I brought up Subi Raman is we didn't know when I first ran across this, I didn't know if that was a man or a woman, and that's a point to be taken because we have to realize that there's going to be some margin for error when we're talking about mapping gender identity across these 20 top orchestras, because the only way we can do it, I would imagine, would be based on the player's name, and especially when you consider how many international musicians you're likely to have in a top orchestra. Obviously, we can't count on 100% accuracy, correct?
Sure, and when you've got young American musicians with hip parents giving their kids androgynous names like Dale.
Yeah. So anyway, accepting that as a possible variable, he has, for the top 20 orchestras, which I don't know how he calculated the top 20, but it's a list of a bunch of big orchestras. You wouldn't be surprised to see any of the names. Mapped the overall gender makeup of the performers in the orchestra at large. The Boston Symphony, 70% male, which I was kind of surprised there was any orchestra that was that high, but a lot of them slouched towards Cincinnati, Cleveland, or both, and Detroit or Houston are all in the high 60s. St. Louis, Dave, is actually, that's right, St. Louis is 53% female. And that's the only orchestra that cracks 50% of the top 20 listed. Of course, unsurprisingly, when you talk about conductors, 95% male, 91, music director 95% male. So that's not surprising, not one bit.
I mean, I don't know if I said this before on the show, but when I was growing up in St. Louis as a trumpet player, my hero trumpet player was the principal trumpeter of the St. Louis Symphony, and that was a woman, Susan Slaughter, who just retired last year. So it does surprise me that they are more than 50%, because I'm surprised that any American orchestra would be more than 50% women, but it's great to see that they are. And I'm happy that it's them.
Yeah. Strings kind of reflect what I actually expected based on looking at orchestras over my life. Violin is 59% female overall, and then that's an inverse relationship as you go violin, viola, cello, bass. It goes 59, 48, 32, 9, respectively, for female participation. But then harp, the women dominate the harp, 95%. And a lot of the other ones are what you'd expect to see. Brass is very, very heavily male, except horn is 28% female. Keyboard, mainly female. Principal players, way more, concertmaster is 82%. Here it is, 82% male, while all violinists are 59% female.
That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
That's fishy.
That is fishy.
Maybe it's you think it's maybe just a time frame thing, like those concertmasters have been there for a long time and have tenure, and we'll just have to wait
that
for them
could
to
be.
retire.
Could be.
I don't know.
Once again, this is
I can think of.
And
by the way, nothing better than two dudes sitting around talking about women's issues, right?
Yes, that's right. And we should say that keyboard players have solved gender. All keyboard players across all the orchestras are split evenly, 50% male and female. So there you have it. If you're looking for good gender etiquette information, talk to a keyboard player. They've got it figured out.
Well, I'm glad we got that sorted out.
So a lot of interesting information, and it's the kind of thing we'll have links, and it's the kind of thing you just want to sit and look at and think about. And you got
to see the animated GIF, by the way, of the demographics of American music directors, because it's a very fast moving GIF that has photographs of all 20 of these music directors that are in these 20 orchestras, and it says "man" at the bottom. For all but like a very split second, there is a split second photo. If you look very carefully, you can see there's a split second photo of Marin Alsop, and it says "woman" for that split second, and then it goes back to man.
Very social mediable.
Yes, you should share it on your Twitter machine, and you should add it to your Blippy keyboard. But did you have anything else you wanted to add about these numbers?
No, I mean I think maybe this is just sort of my religion, but I think equality breeds good things. So if I think having more gender parity in orchestras would lead to good things, even though I can't exactly say why.
I think that's reasonable.
Okay, good. Speaking of good things for orchestras, I forgot his name. Overgrown Path guy.
Bob Shingleton.
Very opinionated dude. When he brings it down, he brings it down. He has a piece.
It got a lot of discussion, and not least of which among composers about orchestras, and he likes to call people out. He's calling out orchestras here and how they need to get with the program. And he's talking about the rise in sales of vinyl records, and his kind of the thesis of his argument. This is a quote from the blog post. Consumers are re-embracing actually, a music format that defies the quote music to go unquote movement. They are voting with their wallets for a format that demands, to quote Britain, some preparation, or to quote Copeland, requires the listener to, quote, pay attention to give the music their concentrated effort as an active listener, unquote. But this is the rock/alternative sectors that are capitalizing on this trend, while orchestras and classical labels continue, lemming-like, to give their music away as effortless, socially challenged digital streams, or sonically challenged digital streams. Sorry. Now, while it is true that orchestras and classical labels are giving away their music in sonically challenged digital streams, I think there are a number of things to consider about this. First of all, orchestras are in a different place than rock and pop music, right? If you are already making a boatload of money and you have a great deal of public awareness and public goodwill, you can afford to not necessarily give everything away for free. But if you are just trying to get people in by any way that you can, then it makes more sense to give things away for free. Second of all, and this is the really more important thing, I think he's misunderstanding these numbers about vinyl growth. Yes, vinyl is up. Vinyl is up by some measures 40 to 42% year over year from last year to this year. And that's huge, right? However, it is easy to have very big growth when the raw number is very small, right? If we had one person listening to our show this week, and then next week we had 5 people listening to our show,
500%!
500% growth, right? But really, we got 4 more listeners, right? That sounds much less impressive, and that's a lot of what's going on with vinyl. Another thing to remember about vinyl, a lot of people buy vinyl and never listen to it. The reason that they are buying vinyl, they may not even own a record player, is not to play it. They don't care about that kind of reverent listening that Shingleton is hoping that they will see. And I've asked many of my students about this. I have a lot of students that say they collect vinyl, and they're not doing it to listen to the music. They are doing it because they like the object of the vinyl record. It is a nice memento of your love for a sound and for a musician and for a song. And that is not the same as wanting it to cherish the high quality hi-fi analog sound that's there. And second of all, it is a digital recording that is being pressed in vinyl almost all the time these days. If you're getting a new recording of the Berlin Philharmonic from Sony or DG or whatever, and you just happen to get it pressed in vinyl, it's still going to be digital, just pressed in vinyl. It's not going to sound different. In fact, it'll probably sound worse than a digital recording played back digitally if it's a lossless digital file.
But to me, it's this is kind of his point of view a lot of the time. It's like he wants classical music people to stand up and demand the respect that the culturally superior practice of classical music deserves. Like, if you treat it with the respect that he thinks it deserves, people will naturally start to do the same. And I just don't think that there's any evidence to support that opinion.
Well, I think in some ways it can work. Once you get people into the room, I think it can work. Right?
Yes, but he likes to talk about it as if it's a silver bullet. Well, he tends to act like to ignore the complexity of a situation a lot and suggest some very simple solution that's not really a solution.
I suppose. I think in this case, though, he's just maybe putting some intent behind this statistic that isn't there. And the intent that he's putting behind people buying vinyl records is to listen to the higher quality sound, and I think it is to have really beautiful album art. Right? It's one thing we lost when we went from big vinyl record packaging to small CD packaging. First of all, it changed the aspect ratio, so if you ever buy stuff that's a record that's been re-released on CD, if you buy the CD, it's really annoying because they have to decide where to crop the art to make it fit on a CD.
Or make the whole thing so small that it doesn't have the same impact that it did.
Or if they're redesigning it, then they have to just design it for this smaller thing. And then it gets shrunk down again when you get like a 300 pixel square digital file thing on your iPhone or whatever, or on your remember iPod screens when they were like the size of a postage stamp, and you could see on part of the screen you could see the album art because there was other information on the rest of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not a great experience for looking at album art.
No.
Even my giant phone, right, is still not a great experience for looking at album art. And that's why people buy vinyl today, is because album art is kind of cool.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't. I think you're exactly right, though. It doesn't mean anything about what people want as far as a listening population goes to say that the vinyl is up.
Also, when you go to a show, you want somebody to autograph something for you. You're going to have them autograph your phone, your digital MP3 file.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People still are dumb and listen to MP3 files. People listen to YouTube compressed stuff all the time. Right? It's not going to. They're not going to be convinced. They have already grown up and made their oral peace with very compressed MP3 files, right?
Yeah, and he says they're voting with their wallet or whatever. He says he's exactly right about that. They are, and they've said we don't mind MP3s and we don't mind YouTube, and we like streaming. That's what they've said with their wallets.
What we should do with vinyl, we should embrace the vinyl idea.
Sure.
Because I think it's important that people are treating these physical collections as an embodiment of their taste, and as people identify with music, they are saying, this is the music that I identify with most. You can put stuff in a Spotify playlist, you can start a Pandora station, but that's, first of all, it's very private, it's second of all very free, it's third of all very difficult to share. Right? It's something that is just in your device. On the other hand, if you buy a vinyl record, you put it on your shelf prominently in your living room, and your friends come over and they say, that's really cool, tell me about that band, or I like them too, we should listen to this stuff, or we should go to a show. Like, that's why vinyl is so cool. And I think classical music, I don't know about embracing vinyl, because I think that's kind of weird, but something like that, where there is a physical takeaway, or there's an object, where there is a way of expressing your relationship with this artistic output that is different from streaming it on a streaming service.
Right.
I don't know what the solution is, though. If I did, I would tell you, because it would be cool, and I would buy one. That's it. I have nothing more to say on the matter, and I don't really have anything else to tell you about music. You've taken all of my knowledge and taken it out of my head and put it into your ears. Yeah. So I think that's going to do it for us. It's a short show. We had Thanksgiving this week in the United States. The rest of you in the rest of the world think that probably, if you're listening to this, somewhere in Europe, you just had a normal work week this week. I apologize. I had a short work week this week because something about Native Americans. It's actually a very sad story. We're not going to get into it. It's kind of political. We don't like to get into politics, right, Sam?
Correct.
Right. Sam always agrees with me, just like he just did. See that?
Yes.
Longtime listeners of the show, of course, know that Sam and I always agree on everything.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening to our show this week. We'll be back next week. And if you have any thoughts on anything we talked about in this show, if you'd just like to read the articles that we've been talking about, you can find Sam's lovingly crafted show notes at soundnotion.tv/SN, and you can leave a comment there. You can also leave a comment on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Subscribe to this show. Leave us a comment. Leave us a review in iTunes. That helps other people find us. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to tell your friends about us. And I'm going to make a special point to bring your attention to our Amazon affiliate link, because I'm recording this on Sunday. Last Friday was Black Friday, which is a silly holiday for buying things. And because we need more of those in the United States, we invented Cyber Monday, which is tomorrow as I'm recording this. And I've been told that it has kind of expanded to the rest of the world that celebrates Christmas giving holidays in December. So you will have Cyber Monday deals even if you are not in the United States. But those will be on Monday. And if you are doing your shopping on Amazon, you should first search on our site. Go to soundnotion.tv, and there's a little Amazon search on the right side. And if you just you search there, it'll take you to Amazon just as though you'd searched on Amazon for the thing. But if you buy your thing after clicking that link, even if it's a Christmas gift, even if it's not for you, we'll still get a tiny little commission. That helps us out a lot. Thank you so much to everyone who has done that. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo. Thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you back next week.
Horn of Plenty.
Cornucopia.
Mm-hmm.